Well, we are going to get started, and since it is just a couple minutes after 2, welcome and thank you for joining us. We've got a large audience online as well, but you'll have the opportunity of getting any handouts, those of you who are here in person. And for those of you who are watching online, we'll make them available through an email afterwards. I'd like to get us started on our panel discussion on permit issues and how they affect your real estate transactions. We have with us several individuals who are panel members. Voila, Jesse, don't go away. I push the magic button and it's still staying where it's at. So we'll get Jesse to use his magic and get us moving along. Working now? All right. So we have with us today from Sarasota County, Steve Bell and Brad Bailey and Larry Murphy. And then we will have an attorney with us. Lisa just texted me, she's almost here, but Lisa will join us momentarily. So let me do an actual introduction for each of our panelists. And let me just also say that originally we had Manatee County scheduled to be with us. They were scheduled back in July when this was originally done, and then they confirmed again when we rescheduled it for October. But they had some change in personnel in Manatee County, and we asked them if they would send another representative, and they declined because of whatever stuff is going on there. So they're not here because of circumstances beyond our control. And so unfortunately, because we did originally have Manatee County as well. So Steve Bell, who is in the middle, started back in '84 in construction, when he owned his own construction company for over 10 years in a very cold state called Minnesota. And then he saw the light and he moved to Florida in '98. He got his residential contractor's license here in 2002, and an opportunity provided itself within the county for the inspections department. He was an inspector for 13 years, promoted to inspection supervisor, and after 3 years to inspection services manager. In August of 21, he became the interim building official for Sarasota County, and now been with Sarasota County for just over 19 years. Next to Steve, and to his left and my right, is Brad Bailey. And he's been with Sarasota County for 24 years in the building department. He's been in land development services, zoning division. He currently serves as the permit manager, responsible for all permitting processes, issuance of certificates of occupancy, collecting required fees. Brad, you do the fees too. In the past, he has served in the capacity as assisting zoning administrator and zoning administrator for 10 years. So Steve and Brad are from Sarasota County. On the end to my right is Larry Murphy. And Larry has been with the City of Sarasota for 29 years. That's a long time, Larry. 29 years. And currently serves as the Building Code Administrator. He is a licensed business official, commercial electrical inspector, commercial plumbing inspector, commercial mechanical inspector, commercial building inspector. All these commercial stuff. It's a good thing with all the commercial stuff we've got going in the city. He's also licensed as a residential building inspector, residential electrical inspector, and residential mechanical, as well as plumbing inspector. He holds also the license of the Florida Fire Inspector. He formerly served in the U.S. Army for 8 years, so thank you for that service. And during his career with the City of Sarasota, he's been involved in over $2 billion of development projects, from single-family dwellings to high-rise construction. He's married to Beth and enjoys RVing, golfing, hiking, and general outdoor stuff. So Larry, thank you for being with us as well. And our last panelist is the attorney. And Lisa Gonzalez Moore is an attorney. She is a transactional attorney serving in Manatee and Sarasota counties. She concentrates her practice on real estate and corporate law, providing a concierge service for clients, and transacts business in 2 offices in Bradenton and Lakewood Ranch. She is a graduate of the University of Florida Leventon College of Law and currently serves on the RASM Joint Committee, the Realtor Attorney Joint Committee, as well as boards of other organizations outside of real estate. She's married to Fred, who happens to be a commercial litigator. So she gets advice from Fred oftentimes, and she's a mom of amazing 4 kids. So this is Lisa. She's coming in as we speak, just finishing your introduction. Welcome. You got a spot right here and a water right there.
Thank you so much.
So lastly, but not leastly, is your moderator. I will serve as your moderator today, David Clapp. I am your RASM 2020 president. I also serve on the Realtor Attorney Joint Committee, and I'm the managing broker for RE/MAX Alliance Group. So now that we've gotten through all of the introductions, let's move on. And, you know, this is always a really popular program because permits constantly touch our real estate transactions in so many different ways. And oftentimes a permit issue is all that it takes to derail a transaction and cause it to go, I like to say south, but we're already south, further south than where we are. And so it's important for us to better understand the process, what's involved, and who better to give us some of the answers than our esteemed panel, because the buck stops with them in most cases, right, guys? Yes, they say. So let's take a look at our first question. In a real estate transaction, agents encounter properties with permit issues. When a buyer purchases the property, are they now responsible for those issues? And what are the implications for a new buyer or an owner once they become the transaction owner? What are the implications for them? So Larry, I'm going to start with you and we'll work our way and then we'll mix it up a little bit. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's always the buyer beware.
Can you use the mic too, just to make sure everyone can hear you? And we're broadcasting this, so the microphones also will allow it.
The microphone also might be off.
Oh,
I thought Jesse.
Yeah,
you got it.
okay, great. Yeah, I think that you know, the attorney will probably opine on this as well, but it is buyer beware. If you buy the property and there's inherent conditions on the property as the new purchaser, then you inherit those issues as well. So if, for instance, and I'm assuming in this case, if they buy a property and there was either unpermitted work or, you know, illegal work that took place on that property, then they probably want to, you know, it may or may not show up in due diligence through the reporting. But, you know, if you contact our local division, we always look at the property appraiser's office and look back in our records to see if there was a proper permit pool for any construction or work that was done on the property. You know, so I would say that any buyer should, you know, avail himself. It's a free service that's provided by our division. So, you know, call and find out if you have any questions. If you walk into a house that was built, you know, post or pre-Florida building code, and you suspect that it looks like it's a little more improved than that, call and ask us those questions. We'll be happy to look it up in our permit records and find out if it was permitted or not.
So in the city of Sarasota, are there online records for permits?
Yes, there's a link on our website that will take you to, you can search it by property or PID number.
Okay.
And it will show you the previous permitting that takes place on the property.
How far does it go online?
It'll go back as far as our conversion data, which was back into the 70s.
Into the 70s, so there should be 70s through the 70s. Okay. Steve, how about Sarasota County?
I can pretty much mimic what Larry had just mentioned.
Use the mic, Steve.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I can pretty much mimic what Larry had just mentioned. I would like to add that A permit's not, it's issued to a person or individual, but it really stays with that property. So you gotta think that the permit goes with the property depending on who buys it, sells it, does a cash deal, whatever, it still stays with that property. So you could also look on our website, scgov.net, and you can also search for properties by address. I don't think our system goes back quite as far as Larry's does. We did a conversion possibly around 2001. I'm gonna ask Brad a little bit on that one. But you can definitely search back to then. And if you need something before that, we do have ways of looking and see what was actually permitted or approved. It kind of depends on how far back we're going, but we do have some individuals that can search deeper into our records and probably find an answer. So I would suggest if you have any questions prior to 2001 or you can't find them, contact our permitting office, and you can always call 941-861-5000. That's our contact center, and they can direct you to the proper individual.
So both the City of Sarasota and the County of Sarasota have online access to permits and have the ability to go beyond what's online if somebody wants to pursue it by asking for a manual search. And both of you would agree that the buyer is now liable for any improvements that have been done to that property that are unpermitted.
Yes, whether it be the buyer or if the buyer doesn't disclose it to the next individual, that buyer at that time may not have presented something to the county that we knew about. So it could actually go to 2, 3 buyers down the road. That's kind of something that realtors, I believe, now are searching more into when they're selling properties. So I can't really say for sure that this individual buyer is going to be responsible for it, but it stays with that property until one of your folks actually brings it to one of the new purchasers' attention.
Okay. Brad, anything that you want to add to that?
Just a little bit. We can go back online. Gets a little spotty, maybe mid-90s,
Okay.
but definitely like Steve had said, we have a records division that you can reach out to, and we have some databases that go back a little further. It's a manual search. We certainly can look it up by the address, parcel ID, sometimes by the contractor if we know who that was. But we've been pretty good about keeping things. We don't purge and dispose of things. It has happened, but our records are pretty good. They may not be all inclusive of everything people are looking for, but we can usually determine, at least through providing documentations, and then that opens the door for the record staff to connect with one of our plans reviewers to help answer the questions. Because sometimes the records themselves, unless you're a plans reviewer, maybe you're not sure what you're looking at. So we tag the plans review staff to try to help you guys out, to help citizens. We do get a lot of requests of this nature daily. This is something that happens a lot.
Okay, great. We're going to follow that question up. I'm going to hold questions for right now. I'm going to follow up that question with our second question, which goes to our attorney. Based on the previous question, what are the disclosure responsibilities of both the seller and the real estate agent involved in the transaction? Lisa.
Okay. Is ours?
It's not. It's now.
Yeah, so to tag on to what these gentlemen just said, if I could tag on to number one, just a little bit to make more sense of number two. Number one is, I would point out that there's nothing in the contract that says that the seller's permitting disclosure responsibilities survive closing. So once you close, I would opine that the buyer has now inherited any permitting issues. The only exception I would carve out is something that, I'm sorry, Steve, yes, that Steve just spoke to, which is to the extent that the permitting issue is material enough to the value of the home, then it's possible. And also you have to, where I'm going with this is a Johnson v. Davis claim. So if it's material and it materially affects the value and you can prove that the seller knew about it, then potentially you have some recourse there. My caveat with that is always better to do due diligence than to have to sue people because of the time, expense, heartache, all that good stuff. So I would say from the seller perspective, disclose it if you know it. From the real estate agent perspective, I would say counsel your seller to disclose it if they know it. If you're acting as a single agent, remember that you have some kind of fiduciary, principal agent responsibilities, which means that if you have knowledge and maybe you're kind of, steering your seller a little bit for whatever reason, they need to lean on you in that regard. What you know could be construed as what they know. So I would say when in doubt, disclose it. And then I was going to mention, about the buyer's due diligence. I would just say yes, you're going to get a municipal lien search. I know we're going to talk more about that later, but also just kind of be aware, if you're about to list this property and you see that, the property appraiser has the structure as like a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, but you've been in it and you know that there's this extra bedroom or whatnot, that's kind of a red flag. So you should follow up on that and make sure that there's nothing that doesn't need to be disclosed.
Lisa, I'm going to go one step further with you. Agent knows that something wasn't permitted, tells the seller to disclose it, the seller says, nope, I'm not disclosing it. Does the agent have a responsibility to disclose that?
I would say it depends on that relationship.
Transaction, most of us are transaction brokers, so if we're not a single agent, we're a transaction broker.
I think transaction, you have a stronger, especially, because a transaction agent is really a facilitator of the transaction. You don't have as many fiduciary duties as you might in a single agent representation. So it's arguable that you don't have to disclose it to the buyer. I think you're kind of in dangerous territory if you decided to just kind of zip it and stay out of it, because I know you all know, because it's your daily life, that being a transaction broker can be difficult to manage those expectations of both parties, and you don't want to have to get dragged into the inevitable lawsuit because of what you did or didn't know, and or what the buyer's expectations of you and what you were or not disclosing, what their expectations were. As a transaction broker, you might not have those fiduciary responsibilities, but you still, I would say, have an ethical requirement. And I'm sure David, as a broker, could speak more to the specific rule of your conduct, but I would say in the very least, you may or may not be borderline problematic ethic violation with having that information, knowing that your seller was digging their heels and not disclosing it to a buyer that really had no clue and was hoping that you were going to be more forthcoming in that regard.
Yeah, and it may become a business decision that you have to make whether you give up the listing. Because in some cases, you may just need to give up the listing if the seller refuses to disclose something that could have serious consequences. And permits do have serious consequences. Well, let's keep moving. We've got a lot, and we will allow time for questions. So please write your questions down as we're going. We've got several prepared questions that we'll get through, and by going through the prepared questions, some of your general questions may be already answered, and then at the end, we'll take whatever questions to follow up on them. So the third question, many owners, we call them weekend warriors. Some of you in the room are weekend warriors. Many owners do work on their homes themselves. What repairs and improvements is an owner required to obtain a permit for? And what are some common examples of unpermitted work a buyer should be on the lookout for? So I'm going to start with Brad. We'll go the other way.
So the state does allow for homeowners to pull permits. Steve brought a handout, which we'll pass out later, that talks about when you do need a permit and when you don't. And it's pretty inclusive. There's always some areas folks call and what they're doing, maybe a little bit of this and maybe a little bit of that. we always say, hey, give us a call before you do anything. Examples of unpermitted work, you'll see a garage turned into an extra room. You'll see a lanai enclosed, went from screen to wooden block walls. Additions are tough because neighbors and code enforcement officers can see additions going up. So it's mostly interior work, maybe windows. So somebody changing out windows, and there's a lot of confusion out there, especially when you purchase your windows from, I'm not going to name one of the big stores because I
Big box store.
yeah, because they may or may not know the codes or the rules. Thank you. But people will change out windows, and a neighbor will turn them in, code enforcement will drive right by. But those are the big ones, and we work a lot with the new purchaser of the home. After they purchased it, they found out that previous owner put in windows, so it's a shock to them. We work with them, helping them through the process, getting the paperwork that they need, telling them what they need to get them in for review. So, but that would be, Steve, I mean, that's.
Steve, anything you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, just a little bit. Lisa had mentioned, if you see on the property appraisers, it's a 2-bedroom, and all of a sudden you go there, it's a 3-bedroom. Bedrooms are a big one that sometimes gets snuck in because they do them interior and nobody ever knows about it. A new AC, that's also one that we get a lot of questions on. A shed, even a new roof. These are some of the things that we find new owners asking to get permitted. Like David had mentioned, or Brad mentioned, that I did bring along a flyer that's got when I need a permit and examples of when I don't need one. These touch on them, they're not all inclusive. So please, if you have any additional questions, there's some information on the bottom. I'd be happy to go through these if you want to, or we'll distribute them. And,
Maybe, we'll distribute them and,
right,
after, go ahead, well, are you finished with that?
I am, yes.
Larry, on the city of Sarasota.
Sure, Dave. And I might add, this is a great question because this comes up quite often. And I'll stick more to the generalities of it, and that is the fact that the Florida Building Code, particularly this one would be the Florida Building Code residential, because we're talking about, I'm assuming, single family homes for the most part. So, any alteration of the electrical, the plumbing, the mechanical, or the structural support of that building under the Florida Building Code residential would require a permit.
Yeah, repeat that again.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Any alteration of the building's mechanical, plumbing, or electrical systems, or the structural support systems would require a permit under the Florida Building Code. Okay. And what we see most commonly in the city of Sarasota is not too different than what you've heard Mr. Bell talk about, which was the enclosures of carports, the enclosure of garages, even additions, windows, kitchen remodels. I mean, we've seen pretty much the gambit of siding, structural replacement, siding work that was going on, roofing replacements without a permit, AC replacements without a permit. So it really runs a whole gambit of things that require a permit that eventually, homeowners contract with a friend or that's in the AC business or whomever, and this work gets done. And often it's not in compliance with the codes to begin with. They're either supplying a unit that doesn't meet the seasonal energy efficiency ratio or something of that nature, or maybe doesn't even have a product approval in the state. So in essence, and sometimes they end up paying for the same thing twice. So, that's about the same things we have in the city.
So I'm going to ask a couple different things and ask whether permits required in the city and versus the county, because sometimes they're different. They don't mirror necessarily each other. So kitchen cabinets where there's no plumbing, electric, or wall changes, does that require a permit in the city?
Well, the kitchens of today are not the kitchens of yesterday. Most all of them incorporate electrical into it, especially the overhead cabinets and things. So the city also has within their zoning ordinance a requirement that if the remodel is over $1,000 and it would be in violation of the technical code, then a permit has to be pulled. In my experiences, most every time someone goes in to replace kitchen cabinets and upper cabinets, you know, without some kind of a report from someone saying that they haven't installed under cabinet linings and they've run through the outlet. A lot of people today even incorporate the outlets into the cabinets so that you push a button and they pop up. So I wouldn't say in all cases, but there are going to be a certain cases if you're replacing just cabinets, you would probably be required to get a permit if you're altering the electrical or the plumbing, if you're changing the location of the sink. And usually in a lot of cases, when they do the remodel house, they end up changing the location of the sink. So, you know, I would say that not all the time if they're just changing, but there's probably more often than not going to be a requirement.
The $1,000 threshold almost always probably would require that because the cabinets are going to be more than $1,000. So in the city, it's probably likely that you're going to need a permit to change kitchen cabinets. Sarasota County, how does the county view kitchen cabinets? Again, no plumbing, electric, or the wall change, because obviously that does require it. But if it's swapping out the cabinets,
Sure, if you're referring just directly to kitchen cabinets or even vanities, Sarasota County does not require a permit for that. You could even replace the sink in the exact same location, and that would not require a permit. So if we're going by strictly what you're saying, kitchen cabinets or vanities, any cabinets, Sarasota County does not permit those. We don't have a value, a dollar value that I'm aware of, unless Brad knows something.
and that is one of the differences, and that's why I asked that particular question, because it does. Appliances, replacing appliances, kitchen appliances, dishwasher.
Going to me?
Yeah, county,
No, appliances we do not permit.
city,
Appliances, again, that's a plug and play item, as long as you're not changing, you know, from electric to gas where you have to have gas. You know, so again, any violation of those technical codes, if you're having to run either an upgraded electrical service or a gas line to facilitate, then you would be required to get a permit. But if you're doing a typical 30-inch stand-up range, you know, plug and play, no.
hot water heater. City,
I'll go first. There seems to be some hesitation there. Yes, and there's a good reason for that. I think in most cases, again, you know, not every hot water heater is the same as the hot water heater that was there. You know, there was for a point in time back in the late 80s, early 80s, that, you know, and they're still popular now, that they're changing out the Insta-Hot systems. And, you know, the contractors that were out there selling these systems weren't upgrading the electrical capacity for these units. So we've decided that it was better to err on the side of caution for our residents and require a permit for a change out to make sure it's like for like, to make sure that it doesn't require a service upgrade, to make sure that it is vented properly. So yes, in the city of Sarasota. we still
city of
require-
Sarasota always, county,
This has been a pet peeve of mine. I've never seen a hot water heater. I've always seen a cold water heater. Sorry. But if you're doing like for like in the county of Sarasota, we do not require a permit for that. But any alteration of the water heater, if you're going from electric to a gas or to an Insta-Hot, absolutely, you need a permit for it at that time. Or if you're altering the electric, like Larry says, that's getting outside of just changing the water heater. But if you're doing like for like, Sarasota County does not permit that. Does not issue a permit for it, I should say.
So we can see that there are differences, and my point in doing this is so that you, both the city and the county, have lists of things that require permit and don't require permit. And you need to familiarize yourself with those things, depending on where you do business, even in Manatee. They all have different lists, and you need to be aware of that. Lisa, I think you wanted to.
Well, I was gonna tag on because this might be out of the purview of our
discussion today, but since the question is specifically about the weekend warriors, we're talking about permits. I feel like licensing is somewhat tiny bit related. So when you say that a permit is required, do you want to clarify? And I could be misconstruing the rule, but it might just be new construction, that the owner is permitted to pull the permit themselves, but I think only in limited circumstances. But I feel like you guys would probably be better at explaining that rule in case you have a new listing with the weekend warrior.
Yeah, so let's follow up with that, where an owner could pull a permit to do some of this stuff. What's the limitation?
So the state does allow owners to pull permits under certain conditions on single family, two family homes, not multifamily. If you're in a condo, owners cannot pull permits. The two big things that we convey to people when they come in and they ask, can we pull a permit on their property? One, we make sure that they own it, that we're dealing with the owner. It's not in an LLC. An LLC cannot pull a permit. We do allow properties in a trust, but we require additional information to make sure that they can act on behalf of the trust. Our legal department has given us some documentations and a checklist. The two big caveats that you have to meet for a homeowner to pull a permit is it's got to be your property. You can't sell it or rent it out for 1 year after completion of the permit.
That's critical.
And that prevents the flippers, the investors that just want to come in and they think they're contractors and just keep flipping properties. So the other thing is they have to be on site during the process. They have to be at the permit office. They have to be on site. The inspectors come. That's
Not necessarily when the inspector comes, but anytime the work is being,
okay.
Work is being done.
yes.
Okay.
But they have to own it. It can't be rental property. Can't sell it. What else? Oh, no. Yeah, it can be expensive. They can't hire unlicensed people. So any of their subs, their trades have to be licensed. They can do the work as well if they are comfortable with that and they can do it. But they can't hire a handyman because that's what Steve mentioned. That's where the fines come in. Because then they're acting in the capacity of an unlicensed contractor because they're hiring unlicensed people. So we have an owner disclosure form along with the regular paperwork. We make sure at the permit centers that they understand it. And they have to sign off and notarize it because the responsibility is on them at that point. But that's only for single family and two family homes. Anything other than that, commercial, there's a dollar amount involved. They can do it. It's got to be basically a freestanding building. Can't be a multi-tenant building.
75,000.
I think, yeah. So the repairs have to be under that amount.
Under 75,000.
And it has to be a freestanding building. So if you had a small mom and pop restaurant that was in a freestanding building and they wanted to do some work and it was in their name, not a liability, not an LLC, then they can pull it. But that's a rare situation most of the time. When it comes to commercial, we'll see contractors.
Larry, in the city, are there any changes or is that mirror pretty much for
Yeah,
owner
because-
pulling permits?
Yes, because most all that's set in statute as well, and as well as the building code it reiterates. But I think the thing that actually sews it up good for everyone involved is the owner actually has to appear in our office and sign it. That can't be delegated. So, you know, the fact that they have to do that, at least we know we're talking with the owner. And as well as has been said, you know, they're not allowed to, you know, have unlicensed, you know, people working on their property. They are required to provide supervision of the work that's being conducted. And, you know, so you're going to find that there's going to be a lot of similarities between Sarasota County, city, and any other authority having jurisdiction when it comes to the enforcement of the homeowner. A lot of people refer to it as day labor permitting or homeowner permitting. Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Just as a follow-up on that, should we find that the owner is not present and there are individuals working at that property? We do issue a stop work order at that time. In Sarasota County, it's $150 fine for that. And then we require a licensed contractor to take over the permit at that time.
Okay. Good, all good information to know, for sure. Let's move on to question number 4. Does your municipality actively look for permit violations within your jurisdiction? And if so, how do you check for them? Larry, let's start with the city of Sarasota.
Sure. Well, the city of Sarasota has its own code enforcement division as well. That's staffed by, I believe, 8 personnel at this current time.
8.
And their responsibility is to follow up on complaints. There has been a statutory change on that. It used to be we would receive anonymous complaints, but now we cannot act on anonymous complaints. If the complainant does not give us their name and contact information, we will not go out and act on that complaint. So they're the ones that are actively out there looking, and it really is it's a byproduct of their other daily activities for enforcement of other property issues such as overgrowth, trash, rubbish, derelict vehicles, and other things. So it's not like they're actively out there just searching for building code violations. They're out there searching for property standards as well.
Okay. So that's the city and the county, Steve?
Yeah, we pretty much can mimic that. We do have 2 different code divisions though, one for derelict vehicles, tall grass, and then also one for unlicensed contracting and unpermitted work. Again, we follow the same guidelines. It has to be reported by someone who is giving their name and address. I shouldn't say it has to be, it could be they're going around and notice work being done. They would stop and ask, for a permit, or they can search our website to see if there's a permit. But yes, we do have individuals who do look for non-permitted work being done and also unlicensed work being done.
Years ago, I heard a story that a municipality was using Google Earth and looking at houses and saw that there were new windows in a house. And they looked and they didn't see a permit for it. And this owner was the new owner, bought it, in this case, from a for sale by owner. And so thankfully a realtor was not involved, but the seller promoted it as, hey, there's new windows in this house. Didn't say to the buyer that they weren't permitted. And a year or 2 later, this municipal individual found these new windows through Google Earth. Is that something that's being done in either of your municipalities?
I can speak for the city of Sarasota. I can tell you we're not using Google Earth to enforce property standards. No.
Okay.
I wish I could speak further into it, but since I've only been an intern for the last 3 months, I really haven't known them to go into Google Earth to use for code enforcement. So unfortunately, I can't answer that.
Brad?
I've seen it more for supporting complaints. So if the officer is responding to a complaint, sometimes you can tell there's new windows, sometimes you can't. So in their research, they'll go back and look at old real estate listings on Google Earth and for supportive to their investigation, because every now and then when we have the cases come up, you'll go in. We like to look at the attachments to the code enforcement case because it helps us. Sometimes the people standing in front of us don't understand the process, or maybe they're not forthcoming with all the information. And you want to make sure that when they permit it, they cover everything. So we go in and look at the pictures, and there's been a couple of Google Earth things that, again, not driving around with Google Earth, but using it to say, hey, we got a complaint that these windows put up, or if they drive by and there's old windows at the curb, then they might go to Google Earth because, were those the windows of this house, or does the guy have a business where he just changes out windows and disposes of them? So, but not just Google Earth, more, like I said, more supportive of their research.
Do either of your municipalities look at MLS listings for something in the description that says unpermitted or work done without a permit or anything of that nature?
Sarasota County, it's more like the windows. If they receive a complaint, that website's very helpful.
The Realtor,
Yeah.
like Realtor.
or,
Or the MLS.
yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know of any code enforcement officer that browses through all the listings to see if something doesn't match, a property, or find a listing and then go to that property and see if it matches what they may have had previously or something like that. I'm not aware of any bars doing something like that.
Larry, in the city, anything?
No, I do know that they were looking at a, and only for full disclosure, I know that they were looking at a system when it comes to vacation rentals, that it was an outside firm that was being contracted to, that had a logarithm that was looking for certain key things for the enforcement of that, but nothing related to code for building or property standards.
Or seasonal rentals. Okay. Let's move on to question 5. Quick question on, we're going to hold the questions until we get to the end. Thank you. Yeah, we'll come back to it. Just write it down. We'll come back. I want to get through the questions that we have, and then we'll certainly circle back. The standard sales contract gives the buyer the right to do a permit search. What are the rights of a buyer when it comes to open, expired, and unpermitted improvements? And how can a title permit search help in this matter? And what are the costs? So Lisa, sure.
The standard sales contract, we have the 2 versions, the as is and then what I call the regular one. Both of them give the buyer the opportunity to do a permit search. Commonly, this is done in conjunction with a municipal lien search, which as a title insurer, your closing attorney is going to be ordering anyways. So I would say, at least in my practice, many of us use a vendor, many of us use the same one. So you can frequently bundle what you're asking them to inquire about, and it usually is the state of taxes, permitting, code enforcement, and there's one more. Yes. That's why they call it a municipal lien search. And so that is going to run, it depends on if the municipalities charge a fee. But I usually try to average that expense for those items at anywhere from 75 to, I think I've seen it as high as 135 in some municipalities. Well worth the money. So I would definitely recommend that your buyers not try to parcel out, the municipal lien search is going to be ordered regardless, unless they're not getting title insurance, and that's a whole other caveat-filled seminar. So they're going to be ordering that kind of thing anyway, so there's really no point in saving the $20 to not have the permit included in the search. And then the question then becomes, well, what happens if we find unpermitted, or open or expired permits that need to be closed out? And the contract, depending on your contract form, your as-is has this being conducted during your inspection period. And your regular contract has this language, and I believe now it's about to be not significantly modified, but there's going to be a permit limit now in the upcoming contract change. And so it's going to work just like the regular contract did, except for that now you have this permit limit that your seller then can decide whether or not they're going to engage in fixing it. It's really a super, I have always found that when these permit issues come up, that the county or the city officials are perfectly, wonderfully helpful. And it's usually something along the lines of, oh yes, we just need a special inspection and then we need to pay this fee. And so it can happen that it's not an insurmountable problem. It's more timing, I think. So what I would suggest is you get this done, you definitely get the report. If it shows something like that, if you're expecting the closing attorney to help you figure out what's wrong with it or how to fix it, let them know that sooner than later. Obviously, if you're going to do it, just reach out to the county and the city officials and they will tell you what needs to be done. And then the next step, and this is the important one, is depending on which contract form you use, make sure you're staying within your time frames to see this through to the end. So if you call up the city or the county and they say, okay, you just need to schedule an inspection, well, we can't do that for another 2 weeks, but you know that you're in as-is contract and due diligence period ends in 8 days. You have to think that through and then maybe, contract amendment time and that sort of thing.
So in the standard contract, one of the options is if the buyer wants to take the permit limit and then take responsibility for those either unpermitted, open, or expired permits, they can do that. And then they inherit, like they said earlier, our first question, then the buyer takes the responsibility in the future for those permits, so they can't take that permit limit.
Yeah, which is a nice option too.
So let's move to question 6, which kind of dovetails this. If an improvement that required a permit wasn't permitted, what is the process of applying for an as-built permit and closing it out and any fines that may be applicable? Because in our home inspections, we find sometimes improvements that weren't permitted. And now we've got to deal with them. And the standard contract requires the seller to obtain and close that permit prior to the close of the sale. So what's that process? What's involved in applying for the as-built permit? And Brad, we'll start with you on that one.
This happens more often. And you can really empathize with the potential buyer or sometimes even the seller. So obviously if permits were required, who gets the permit really doesn't matter to us, except if the seller wants to pull that as an owner, they can't because of the thing I mentioned before. If the seller is selling a home, he can't pull the permit. The new buyer cannot pull the permit because they don't own it yet. So a contractor has to be involved. It's problematic. Our process is the same whether the work is or not for the most part. Still have to get a permit, still have to show us, demonstrate what was there before, how the work was done. Here's where it gets problematic. Sometimes property owners have to have the contractor or an engineer go in and remove drywall because they may or may not know what was done. We still need to know that it meets code. We can't issue a permit that doesn't meet code, and they may have to make modifications at some point. So it is problematic. The inspections are similar, and I'll let Steve speak with that because he probably sees that more. From the permitting standpoint, they have to have a permit. If they bring it to our attention, however it gets to us, other than code action, if there's a code enforcement case, that's different. Then the fees are the same, unless code enforcement actually cites it. If someone comes in and says, hey, we screwed up, we did X, X, Y, Z without a permit. We don't take that and issue them triple fees. If there's code enforcement, we have to by ordinance. So we try to work with the people, and every case is different. I have one now where, you know, it was an addition put on a house 25 years ago. The woman's husband passed away. He did the work. The new buyer comes in through due diligence, discovered that this addition can't be there. So the question is, do I need a permit to remove it? She's got to get a contractor out there to evaluate what it is, how is it attached. So that's where it's more problematic on the property owners. Again, our process is the same. We're going to issue a permit. As far as the inspections, it's also problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we don't have what you're stating as an as-built permit. It would be permitted as if it was permitted today or 10 years ago. Then our inspectors still are all licensed by the state to ensure that it is installed according to code and safety, the plan. So unfortunately, at times, areas do have to be exposed. There are some leniencies. If you're adding an outlet, maybe, you wouldn't necessarily have to open up that part of the wall as long as the inspector can verify what kind of wire was used, what branch circuit it may have been ran off of. So it really depends on the scope of what was done as to how far we get into it. Having an engineer a lot of times comes into play when it's a concrete installation. We definitely don't want to make somebody tear up a foundation or something to verify it was there. We allow an engineer to take out his metal scanner or ground penetrating radar, whatever he wants to use to verify it meets the intent of the code and the approved plans. And we will take a letter for the concrete work. Anything above that, Sarasota County likes to have our inspectors follow through with the inspection. I wouldn't want an engineer to go out and say that the whole room addition meets code compliance and the plans, and please accept my letter. Again, we take it for the concrete, but the remainder of it, we would want to do the inspections ourselves.
Larry, how about the city? How does the city look at this?
Well, if it's an improvement that required a permit and was never permitted, it really drills down into what was the actual unpermitted work that took place. Is this a AC change out or something simple, or is it more complicated? As you heard earlier, an entire addition added to a line with electrical, mechanical, and plumbing. We've had very good success in working with the owners of the property and having, either the permit application would have to be done by a contractor. It needs to, he needs to go do his due diligence to see what's built in place and build a set of plans for that particular permit. And when it comes to, we try to be as least invasive as we can on a property. So we would probably have a Division II contractor, that contract to the general contractor, building contractor, residential contractor. Submit an affidavit that they went through, they've looked at, the entire electrical installation and that it conforms to, the code that's in effect at the time of the permit. There's been some times where, they've had to rewire some things because they tagged off additional circuits that weren't arc faulted like they're required to be today. We've had some instances where some of the lines were actually undersized, and the city kind of takes the stance that the Division II people that are out there doing this analysis of the structure and providing an affidavit for it, as a Division II contractors, they're certainly not going to put their license on the line. Same way with the mechanical contractor and the structural. So that's kind of how we've handled that. And it really allows us to be a little less invasive on the property rather than making them go out and tear things down. So, it really depends on the case, and it is a case-by-case basis, and hardly any two are the same. So that's kind of how we look at it in order to gain compliance to issue a permit, and we will always set up for filings for our staff.
So a permit can be pulled, it would be inspected, it would be final. Brad said you don't enforce the triple penalties on an owner who's coming forth and saying, unless they're caught, then the triple penalties. Is the city the same way, Larry, as far as the fees and triple penalties?
Yeah, if it's self-reporting, we don't impose, the maximum penalty under the codes for that type of work.
Okay.
Because we feel that they've come forward, they're divulging the fact that they knew this. But again, if it comes through a code enforcement action, then, under the code, on our ordinances, we have to do a triple.
Yeah, so understand that's 3 times the normal permit cost as a fine for doing it without a permit. But it's good to hear that you're willing not to charge that for a homeowner coming forth and self-reporting in order to clear up a real estate transaction. Is there any way that it is expedited if it's in a real estate transaction? Are you able to work to get it done quicker?
For Sarasota County, we obviously do our best to work with the applicants in those situations. This is one of those situations where we try to be fair to everyone who submits permits, and to put one in front of another because of a closing date isn't fair to the person that followed the rules. But obviously there are those, if it's minor enough, I can only speak for myself, and my staff are putting in a permit and they have a closing in a few days, and our turnaround time for residential is 15 business days currently, and it's not going to quite make it. I'll talk to the head of plans review or Steve and get there, because really it's got to come from them. They know their staff's worker schedule, and if it's something minor enough, we have. But there's that old saying, and it's going to sound bad, but you don't want to reward
bad behavior.
Yeah, and, now if it's something where the person, like the scenario I use, her husband did this 20 years ago. I'll do what I can for her, because she already lost one sale.
Right.
Because of the time frame. And she, what contractor wants to come in on this project to help her? And she's struggling finding a contractor, but she has to have one, so.
Okay,
To touch on that one more time, we do have some permits that are over the counter. So if it was a re-roof, that's a BE permit. You could get that the same day. An AC change out is the same day. Service change,
Yeah.
some of
single
those things can be
windows.
done quicker.
Yeah, garage doors. You can get the permit today and have it closed tomorrow, possibly, even possibly the same day, depending on how busy we are that day.
True.
But,
And that's a lot of the stuff in a real estate transaction. AC wasn't permitted, roof, some of that stuff.
And to be honest with you, I think this is one of those types of situations where, help from both sides of the aisle is greatly appreciated, because the sooner we know about it, the sooner in the process it's devolved, then, the timeframes aren't as tight as I'm going to close it tomorrow. That's probably not going to be able to be accommodated. So I think it's one of those things where, working on both sides of the aisle, get it to us as soon as you know about it, so we can work with you.
Yeah.
Is really beneficial.
Okay, let's go to question 7, and this is similar, so we won't spend as much time. Go to the home inspection, it's discovered there are improvements that are not permitted or should have been, or there's open or expired. The last question focused more on improvements that were unpermitted, but we have open or expired permits. What's the best way to get these permit issues cured? Is there a path to expedite the solution for closing that's happening very soon? So let's focus more on the open and expired permits, because we talked about the unpermitted type stuff. Larry, let's start with you and City.
Sure. And again, this is going to depends on the complexity and what happened on the job or at the home. It could be as simple as, an AC that was done 10 years ago that's already out of warranty. It's been in existence, hasn't caused a problem for 10 years. It fits in the parameters of the Florida building codes that's 6 years old. We could probably close that administratively. But if it goes to, structure or, something that, really tends more to the life safety side, those things, we certainly will work with them. Hopefully get those things identified. I wouldn't say that, there's a firm path to expedite it, but if staff's available and we can, we're certainly going to accommodate that.
Okay. Steve, count.
So if something was found to not be permitted or open or expired during the course of an inspector's inspection, more than likely that inspection is going to fail for exceeding the scope of the permit. If the inspector is there to do a master bath remodel and goes to the front door and the stickers are still on the front door with the trim out, and it's easy to see that it's a new door being replaced or something, we would fail the inspection that we were there and for exceeding the scope of the permit, and require them to do a plans change, add that item into it. If it was an open inspection, maybe they had a single window change out, we were there again for the bathroom remodel. We could ask the inspector, can you pick that up as long as you're here? Sure, they could pick it up as long as it's still an active permit, it hasn't expired or anything. So for an open permit, it's very easy to get that inspected and closed while you're there possibly. An expired permit would have to be reinstated. We do charge a $51 fee for reinstatement. So the contractor would have to request an extension. And once the fee is paid, then it could be opened back to the issued status, schedule the inspection, we come on, take care of that. It possibly could be the same day if an inspector was there. They could make a call to our permitting center, get it unexpired, I'm going to say, then it's back to an open permit, they could pick it up and sign it off. So it's possible it could be done the same day also, depending on county's fairly of it.
So in some cases, these could be expedited very quickly.
Absolutely, yeah.
Brad, anything you want to add to that? Or?
Yeah, Steve's right. If I could go back to the expired permits, because we get these a lot. It's usually through title searches and
Yeah.
realtors and, it can be frightening because it's an open permit or, one that expired. Similar to the city, we look at that permit. Is it a permit or was it a permit application? Is it something that never came to fruition? So staff administratively can close those, and we'll look into them. Like we had one about a week and a half ago where there was an open pool permit from 07. When we go to the property appraisers, there's no pool. So we can administratively close out that permit application. If it's truly work that was never inspected but completed and we need to reinstate the permit, like Steve said, we have an inspections hotline. And you can call them, you can email them, and I'm going to give you the phone numbers here in a minute. And just say, here's a permit number, here's an address, there's an expired permit. You guys can, on behalf of your client, start that process. It doesn't have to be, if the contractor's still around, it's best for them to do it because it's their permit. But it doesn't have to be. The owner can call. We've had realtors call and say, hey, we've got a closing and pay the fee. It's going to be submitted for approval. This happens pretty quick. Within a day, you're going to find out then if you need to get a hold of my record staff and get copies of anything, or if we can just reinstate it while inspected. So it's on a case-by-case basis depending on the scope of work. But our inspection hotline, and they're going to kill me for this, is obviously 941-861-3271, and then 3273. And they can also take payments over the phone. It happens rather quickly. And like Steve mentioned, if you were to get something reinstated today, you could probably have it inspected tomorrow when you meet your closing. So we do our best, especially, and I always tell the realtors, because if they call me, I can't take money because they don't trust me with money. So I have to refer them to the same hotline. I'll say, let them know when we talk, but also tell them you have a closing coming up. Because if we know we're working against the date for you, we'll make sure that in our hundreds of them that we do, that we take care of yours because there's a time crunch in there. So that's all.
Great.
I was just gonna highlight that I feel like Brad really just hit on it a little bit more, but just to point out practical point for your purposes, is that expired permits need to be reopened. So I was under the impression that the contractor had to do it. So that might be a good first starting place, but they do have procedures for when your contractor is MIA and your owner needs to say that it does happen. So, but the contractor is usually, if it's expired, if it's not open already, it is kind of the first place that might be the quickest way to slip in and get. And I feel like for the most part, except for the ones that are MIA, they are happy to do that. They realize that it's an error.
Because it's shown on their license too. It's an open active permit. They don't want that, and things slip through the cracks.
So let's keep moving.
Dave,
Yes.
someone asked if that number is city or county.
That's the county. That's the county. Yeah. So question 8. What remedies does buyer have if unpermitted work is discovered after closing? Is there a difference in these remedies if it's an as-is contract versus a standard contract? Lisa?
I think the short answer is no, there's not a difference. And the other short answer is not really a lot of remedies, again, unless it falls into a dollar amount that would put you in a Johnson v. Davis claim. And then again, that you could prove that the seller had knowledge of it. So the big takeaway is really try to address these before closing. But if you did find yourself after closing having to deal with it because your buyer, I'm sure, is going to be upset, the problem is getting to what would be considered a material, materially affecting the value of the property, and whether the seller had knowledge. So unfortunately, no, once you close, the permit provisions in the contracts they don't survive a closing.
So you have your opportunity to do your due diligence under the contract. Make sure you do it after you close. your remedies are very good.
Yes.
Question 9, we're moving right along. A basic timeline, what's involved in the permitting process from the application to the inspection of the work to the closing out of the permit? And what are the different permit statuses, open, closed, canceled, expired? And how long is a new permit good for before it expires? This may be common between the city and the county, but Larry, do you want to start with that?
Sure. The basic timeline for the permitting process, and I'm assuming we're still in the residential side,
Yes.
is that once an application is deemed complete, it's distributed to our various reviewing departments. Usually our engineering division has a review for the driveway cuts and things of that nature. Our zoning has a review for setbacks, heights, daylight plane, etc. We also have an arborist review for tree protection ordinance. And, we also have the building review. So that timeline from submission right now, and it all depends, I think you're going to get a varying, timeline depending upon the time of the year and the jurisdiction. But the city of Sarasota tries to have at least the comments out on a single family within 2 to 3 weeks. Okay. Once the comments go out, we have a standing policy that the transmittals that come in and answer those comments are reviewed the day they come in, because we know it's a job that's in active progress. So we look at those to make sure that they've answered our comments. Our permit technicians are constantly, monitoring, and our system automatically, once all divisions have approved, will drop that permit application back into what we call admin review. Admin review, once it drops into their Dropbox, they go ahead, they check it for completeness, and whether it came in through our portal or through paper, or I should say electronically or paper submitted, usually within 2 to 3 days after it hits the admin review, it's feed and ready for issuance. How long that takes sometimes depends on how quickly the contractor responds to comments. Usually, in my experience, you'll have some contractors that they'll get their comments and within 2 to 3 days they're responding to those comments. And I have some contractors that will take 2 to 3 weeks to respond to those comments. So that really affects the timeline, drastically. The different statuses, open, closed, canceled, expired. Open would mean that it's in open status. We also have an issued, which would, some people will say issued is the same as open. Closed, which or completed, that permit has been, accepted and says that it's met all the code requirements, and therefore it's been closed. Canceled would mean that if sometime during the application process and even after issuance, the applicant would have called us and provided us a letter saying that, we wish to cancel this, we're not moving forward with the project. Expired would only happen after the fact that the permit has been issued. The permit's out, issued, it's an active the active status. They haven't received an inspection for 6 months, we'll automatically throw that into expired status. And then once it's in expired status, there's options underneath the code to reinstate that permit if they choose to move forward with it. And then again, if they chose not to move forward with permitting, they hadn't started construction, then they would have the option to go back and cancel or withdraw that permit. And I think you'll find this will be with every AHJ in the state of Florida. Any permit that's issued for new construction or remodel or repair is good for 6 months from the date of issuance. After that 6 months, if you haven't received a progress inspection, it would go to expired status.
And Larry, if you go back to the application process, can you give us what's the best and the worst case scenario as far as getting them through the city? How many weeks is best and how many is worst?
Well, again, like I said, we try to stay within that 2 to 3 week time frame. And statutorily, we're required within 30 days. If they've answered all our comments, we have to have that permit issued. So if it goes beyond 30 days, it's going to have to be statutorily it's going to be the applicant's fault that it hasn't been issued. They either haven't come in to pick it up or they have not answered comments.
Okay. Steve, on the county.
I'm probably gonna let Brad touch on this
Brad?
a little bit more because he actually works more with the permits being issued and such. I could probably tell you that our residential, our standard operating is to get them done within 20 days. Currently, we have some that are being done in 7 days. It really depends on what the scope is and what the intake of permits is. Currently, right now, we've slowed down a little bit on the intake of permits, although our inspections are through the roof. So if I could, I'd rather let Brad answer more on the timeline.
So kind of echoing what Larry said, that's similar to the way we do it. What I think I heard is our system doesn't go back once it's reviewed and approved. Our system automatically adds the fees and sends it ready to issue, so there's not that admin aspect. But it looks like you're looking at it quicker than we are, so it's probably equals at the end. Once a permit's ready for issue, the applicant, whether it's a homeowner or the contractor, gets an email, here's what's owed, come and get it. If they've applied online and it's electronic, then they get notified the same thing, that they're not gonna come pick it up. Obviously, they're gonna download them. As far as what are the statuses, we don't really have an open status for permits. It's either received or review in progress, issued, closed, canceled, expired, frozen. What I mean by that is if there's a permit that's issued and the contractor says, hey, I'm walking off the job, I'm not working for these folks, he or she can remove themselves from that permit. When we've got an issued permit, we can't let it go further until somebody takes it over. Sometimes the homeowner can, sometimes they got to bring in another contractor. So we put it in a status called frozen. And I've had realtors call over the years go, hey, this permit's frozen. What the heck does that mean? You know, and so I explained to them, the contractor walked off the job and there it sits. And here's what's required to, you know, at that point, the owner has to be involved. Canceled is the same as closed. We get this question a lot. Hey, I show an open permit. It's usually over the phone, and I'll get these calls and I'll say, well, canceled is the same as closed. The reason we don't just close them is because active permits that have gone through their process from issued, inspected, COs issued are closed. If that hasn't happened, it's canceled. And just like Larry said, usually it's either the homeowner or the contractor says, hey, I'm just not going to go forward. Expired, same scenario. The only difference, I think, and I don't know if the city has this or not, our applications, permit applications expire 180 days or 6 months, just like the issued permits do. Now, we do offer reinstatements, or if it's coming up and they go, hey, I just need another month, they can request an extension. It's not that much money. But so there are processes. If you see the word expired, doesn't mean the end of the world. Each case is different. We go in and can usually figure out, is the permit issued or is it still in the application stage? And then that tells us the path. And a lot of times we have to take it to the building official's office for approval, because if it's an old permit, there may have been code changes that significantly impact the scope of the work, and that person's going to have to reapply. So that's where the permitting division, the techs, don't make those calls because we're not the subject matter experts.
Would you agree 30 to 45 days is average to get a permit approved?
I would say that statutorily we're required to have it ready for issuance. I mean, depending upon if the contractor has responded to those comments.
But if they did, or you had said there's a 2-week period for you getting back to them, and then you're waiting for their response. And is it within 30 days of their response? So you've got two to 3 weeks first, and then 30 days.
Yeah, as soon as the permit has been deemed, the application has been deemed appropriate, once he's answered those final comments, we have 30 days to get this thing through the system from start to finish. If we comment on day 19 or 20 or whatever, and he comments back to us within that period of time, you know, the statutes are set up that we issue residential permits within 30 days. Okay. If he submits comments to us, and let's just say, let's throw the, you know, the boomerang at it, let's call it a private provider permit. Okay. If he has submitted his comments to us and we haven't replied to them, then within certain timeframes, I mean, it's deemed issued by the state. So we've had a lot more timeframes and constraints put on building divisions in the last few years than we probably have in my entire career. You know, they are looking at us and making sure that the problems don't exist within the building divisions. You know, making sure that we're acting in a professional performance mode to make sure that we're not holding permits up to the industry. So again, 30 days is our goal. I mean, we certainly want that, but we certainly can't issue a permit until it's deemed complete.
Okay. So even if we say 30 days, let's just ask, if we're doing waterfront, how does that change it? How much time does that add?
If it's single family residential, it doesn't add anything.
For waterfront permits, for docks and lifts, still within the same time frame?
Unless there's board action required, that will delay an approval. If something, because then you're dealing with the board's schedule. But permits by right.
Yeah, but those would be more of a development application type of style.
Yeah.
So again, if it's, yeah, in most instances, even in our waterfront areas, you know, we're 30 days. So
David, and if you're talking, we're talking issuance of permits at that. If you're talking the actual closing out of the permit.
No,
Okay.
just issuance.
Okay.
Just issuance. Okay. All right, great. I think we did that one enough. Let's, how is each municipality handling section 125.56 Florida statutes regarding governments being given the ability to close an open or expired permit 6 years after its issuance, as long as there's no safety hazards? How do you determine those safety hazards? Is the municipal inspector, is that a municipal inspector call, or does the seller buyer have to pay a fee to determine this? So Steve, we'll start with you on that.
We are handling it by closing permits similar to AC changeouts, docks, new water services, sewer replacements, single doors, single windows. So again, as long as it's not a life safety issue, we're closing those permits. It's really up to the building official to determine if it's a life safety issue or not. If somebody was to present us with a older permit and we looked at the work description, as long as it didn't fall under one of those general services that were just mentioned, it'd really be up to the building official to determine if it can be closed or not.
And that would be you?
Correct.
No, you're looking at it. He is the building official. Same way with Larry, right, Larry?
yeah, that's one of the recent changes in the state statute as well.
Florida realtors fought hard for that,
Yeah.
by the way, because it affects our real estate transactions so much.
Well, I mean, even the Building Officials Association of Florida fought hard for a mechanism to get rid of these types of permits.
Good.
Because, you know, we had those on our books and we had no way to deal with them.
Right.
You know, and again, with an ability like that comes an inherent responsibility as well. So, I mean, they've given us great latitude within the Florida Building Code on that section. Because, you know, it says, you know, they're putting that on us. I mean, basically, is, you know, is it a life saver as it exists? You know, so it best case scenario, I mean, when it comes to those kind of things, unless it's a simple AC change out or something like that that's been active, you know, it was permitted back in 87, or, you know, it's way past even its, you know, warranties and everything, yes, I mean, we're gonna close those administratively. But it also doesn't take into effect, what if this was a residential high rise and it involved a structure work and it didn't get completed? So now I have a threshold reporting requirement under state statute. So it's one of those tools they gave us. It's one of those tools we need to use sparingly. And like I said, with that ability comes a responsibility. So again, it's reserved to minor committee, in my opinion, to close out those types of over-counter type committee that became very difficult to deal with. And I don't want to call out the mechanical industry itself, but the great majority of those permits were for AC jobs. Right. So a lot of
We currently have over 9,000 expired permits.
9,000 expired permits. Wow. And you all, in our transactions, we come up with this all the time. And Florida Realtors fought very hard to get this through to help our transactions move through. But the statute, the way it's written, it uses the word may. There's no obligation for these gentlemen to close it out. It's a may close them out. And so I was very interested to hear your response. I'm happy to hear you guys like to close them out too and get them off your books. But if they're not a safety problem, let's close them out and not have them, be expired permits that are sitting on these properties where we're trying to do a real estate transaction. That's great. For Lisa, our attorney, are permanent issues considered title defects that get the remedies afforded under the contract?
Again, a short answer, no. The only thing I could think of that would get you there is really lien, code enforcement lien, I guess, technically. But that is a little bit of a different animal. If it's just an open permit or an expired permit, then no, you're definitely in either your as is due diligence period or your regular contract permit limit language. So that does not affect title. I don't care about the permits, but I tell you guys because you care about the permits and so do your people.
And so those permit searches that Lisa does and title companies do oftentimes don't get done until right before the transaction closes, which is too late because it's past the inspection period. So you want to make sure you ask Lisa or whoever is doing your title work to order them early on and get them so that you can deal with any permit issues before you get past or out of your home inspection time period.
I think just a quick, follow up on that, like when you are working with your title company or your closing attorney, just personally, the agreement that I have with the vendor that I use is that I do not get charged if it cancels. So I can order it, the minute the title work comes, the minute the contract comes in, we're ordering both, but that's not, that's the fee arrangement I have with that vendor. So it just might be a question you might want to ask. When are you ordering these? When can I expect it back?
Well, let's shift. Last Friday, we did first offering of the RASM Certified Waterfront Specialist designation. And in there, we talked about, because we live in a wonderful community, that a lot of it is waterfront. And there are certain issues that come in permitting with these individuals, gentlemen, when it comes to FEMA and the 50% rule. So our next question goes to, in a flood zone, A and D, which are the high risk zones, how does the 50% rule work? How's the 50% limitation determined and what's it based on? And can you do improvements for 50% per permit? And once that is closed out, can you open a new permit for another 50%? And what improvements go towards that limitation? So for purposes of this discussion, I have provided an example for our code enforcement building officials to consider. And so I'm going to allow them to talk about this example, and that will answer many of the questions that were just posed in the slide before. So Larry, do you want to start with it?
Sure, and I'm glad this is being brought up because I can't talk about flood zones enough these days.
Good, good.
And it's a very good question. The first thing I'd like to clarify is the 50% rule. I hate that terminology, to be honest with you. It's substantial improvement, substantial damage is what it is. So, and how does it work? And what is the 50% limitation, how it's determined? If you look at the example that was provided in the example, they're saying that the building value is $141,000. Okay, that's, I'm assuming that pulled off the Sarasota County property appraisers records. So we take that value for the building only, and we take that and we divide that in half, hence 50%. So once they do that, that would be the value that we would tag for the improvement. Okay, so we have $70,500 to work with. What's included and what's excluded in that determination? Obviously, if this was coming in as a full project and these were all the bulleted items below that they wanted to do, the new swimming pool would not go to the 50% substantial improvement clause. New paver driveway, again, it's not associated with the home. It does not go towards the costs. Kitchen cabinets, new doors, new windows, and new roof would all go to the substantial improvement bottom line. And the way I kind of explain it to my clients when they come into my office and they want to talk about substantial improvement, substantial damage, I kind of tell them, if you pick the house up, you turned it upside down and shook it, whatever falls out, don't count. Everything else counts. If it's attached to the building, it counts. So that's just a quick way of trying to show how and what you should be counting towards that rule. Now, Sarasota County, as well as myself, and I can't, attest to the other jurisdictions, but we take that value that's on the Sarasota County Properties Appraiser's Office, and we're adding 20% to that value. In talking with Bill First, that value is what they associate with the sale of the property. So we add that into it, which kind of takes care of what I call my 20% contingency for unfound. It really bothers me when they come in for a substantial improvement. They have $70,500 to work with. They're spending $69,800. They haven't tore the building out yet, so they have no money to address any outstanding issues that are uncovered during the reconstruction process. I always suggest that they keep 20% of contingency, because once they get to that point, there's not a, oh, I missed that, I'm going to add that. That goes to the value of the building. So then you need to start looking at, well, what are you going to drop out of it if you have to spend $15,000 to reframe these walls? Okay, so that's kind of how we look at it in a nutshell. It's very well outlined. I think it's in FEMA Technical Bulletin P 758 that's available online. If you don't have that, it's a free download on the FEMA website. Go ahead and download that and put it in your library. That's how we look at it in the city of Sarasota.
Okay. Steve or Brad, how do you want to?
I'm just gonna say I'm glad Larry's here because he explained that a whole lot better than I can. I actually had to talk to my flood reviewer and get some explanation over this, but he wrote almost what Larry just said. So I wish I could comment more on it, but I just haven't been involved in the flood rulings yet as the building official. So thank you, Larry, for that. Brad may have something to add to it.
I'm going to stay in my own lane.
So let's go back to the example then, Larry, and anyone else that wants to jump in. We've got 70,500 is the 50%. There is a 20% contingency on top of that. But the first three there, the new roof, the windows, and the doors would all be in that substantial improvement. And that would equal more than 70,000. I think that's $81,000 that's there. So with the 20% contingency, we would still be within 81,000 to do all three of those improvements. Let's say that we only wanted to do the roof in one permit. We could do the roof in one permit, close that out, wait, and then later, 6 months later, we decide we want to do windows and doors. We would be able to go back for a second permit to do that, correct?
You direct that to me?
Yeah.
Yes. Again, we didn't opt to do a stacking ordinance in the city of Sarasota. I know some counties and municipalities have done that. Some are still continuing.
Can you
to do that.
explain that to the audience, the stacking?
Yeah, the stacking clauses through the CRS program, and what they do is they give municipalities points, which in turn can reduce the insurance rates within a municipality. And the problem with running a stacking ordinance for any municipality or county seat is the amount of staff time that takes to run a program, have it staffed, track projects over 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, really becomes very onerous. And the points that they actually give you for the CRS program don't really compensate enough to run that program. So we chose not to do a stacking ordinance, but that still doesn't relieve us from the requirements in the FEMA bulletins, which are guidance to us. That says if a project comes in and say they want to do just the roof, and that's how they present that project to us, we would certainly issue that permit. Okay. If they said they wanted to do the new roof and new windows, again, if they were in that value, we would issue that permit. The caveat that the city of Sarasota has is that once you reach 25% of that 50% threshold, we require all FEMA documentation backup to be provided. We provide the forms on our website. They're filled out and submitted by the contractors along with their sub-bids from their subcontractors, so that we have some assurity that in order for that project, I will call it a project, to be completed, that they're well within their 50%, so it doesn't trigger a substantial improvement. So the stacking ordinance, you may run into in your career into a jurisdiction that does do that. So I would advise you very strongly to contact them and say, how many improvements have been done to this property? If you haven't, how much money it has been spent? And those are all records they would have to maintain to be FEMA compliant for their jurisdiction. I will venture to say you probably won't find too many jurisdictions that are probably taking advantage of the 3 or so points that get you in a CRS review. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, CRS is Community Ratings System for FEMA. So anything, Steve or Brian, you want to add to on the stacking? County doesn't stack either, I don't believe.
I'm not familiar with the stacking term. I can tell you that we do not track cumulative improvements, but we do address phasing of improvements. So phasing improvements are not allowed, whether it is incomplete, multiple permits, consecutive permits, modification of an issued permit, or unpermitted work. So you can't come in and pull a permit today for your roof and a permit when that one's done for your windows and another permit for your kitchen cabinets. That would be considered as phasing the project, and that is not allowed. But if you pull the permit last year for your new roof and next year you pull one for your windows, we don't track those.
Okay. All right.
And Larry probably said this, so I apologize if you did. Is this a correct statement? This would only apply to a non-compliant structure in the flood zone. If the
Below
house
base flood.
below, correct. If the house was okay, then this wouldn't apply.
Well, and that's the problem we have with the updated codes, because the Florida Building Code brought into it a freeboard requirement. So you may be in a home that was built in 2017, 2016, that was compliant with base flood, but it may not be compliant with the design flood elevation. So it would still be subject to the 50% rule, even though it was built compliant in that year. So if your house was built and it's compliant with design flood elevation, then you don't need to worry about triggering a substantial improvement as long as you're building above those design elevations. But again, you certainly couldn't go down to a garage or a storage area below and improve that below the design flood elevation. And the only difference between design flood elevation, base flood elevation, is what they call the freeboard requirement, which in most residential in wherever you're at in Florida is going to be +1 foot above the base flood elevation. So, yeah.
Okay,
That goes up a lot.
let's move on to the next one. What are the improvements that can and cannot be made below the base flood elevation level? And are some grandfathered or special exceptions, or what we call non-conforming, or are they just flat out illegal?
I'll go ahead and field that one.
Okay, yeah, Larry's ready to go on that one.
Well, and again, they could be any or all. I mean, to be honest with you, what you can do below the base flood is very limited under FEMA guidance. It's access, storage, right? And parking. That's all you get below that base flood elevation or design flood elevation. That's all you can have below this. Anything else that you do down there has to be made of durable materials, to include the finishes. To say that, are there some that were grandfathered in? I think every jurisdiction in the state of Florida probably has a variance granted to 1 or 2 structures or many other structures that have been exempted from either an elevation requirement. And if you're dealing with an historical structure, we're in a different set of parameters as well. So this kind of would be a topic I could talk on for hours. Basically, there should be no living quarters or anything below base flood. It's reserved for storage, parking, access, 300 square feet. And what you're looking for is, basically storage of low value items, lawn mowers, that type of stuff. So that's kind of how I would look at it. But yes, there are some homes that have a variance to elevation that was given to that home at the time it was built. If they tore it down, that variance would obviously set and not be granted to the next builder of that property once it's been raised. So you have a little bit of everything.
So in our real estate transactions, we often encounter properties on the Key, CS Key, or Longboat or Anna Maria Island that are in either an A or B, and that lower level has been finished off, and the MLS says that it's non-conforming. Does non-conforming exist, or is it just flat out illegal?
Well, non-conforming is a term that they're using to floodplain as far as non-conforming. If it was a home that was built after our participation in the NFIP program, then it would be considered illegal construction, because we are not permitting that to exist. So it would be illegal in my short term of it. It would be illegal. It wouldn't be conforming unless there was a variance at one point that was granted through the jurisdiction. So I would say 9 times out of 99.9% of the time it would be legal construction.
So what should realtors check before they use the term non-conforming in their description of that property? What should be in place for it to be appropriately deemed non-conforming?
I would say you would want to see the elevation certificate would be one of my key things that I would look for. What at the time it was constructed, did it meet the base flood elevation that was there at the time? That would be one way of doing it. The other one would be, as we require in the city of Sarasota, that the homeowner file a non-conversion agreement for the areas now below base flood. So that if you do a record search for that property, you will see that non-conversion agreement is on record at the Sarasota County Courthouse. That said there were no improvements down there and you're not allowed to convert to any living space or any other space that's not applicable to the codes. So that would be the other thing. If you're looking at the property lines, see if they've got a reporting non-conversion agreement on there.
Okay. So there's some things to check out. If you see non-conforming, you need to do a little more investigating as to see whether it's really illegal or real non-conforming. Anyone else want to add to that?
Just because we get asked this a lot, what I would suggest is if you're not familiar with our 861-5000 number, that's sort of our main call center. That's really, if you want to hear from our experts, simply put in a request. These folks will take the message, and then permitting staff, most of the time same day, if not within the next day, will put you in touch with, by email or phone, of the two individuals that are the experts. That's probably the best way if you're not sure. Also, if you want a copy of an elevation certificate, they may have it. My records department may have it. So at least you're in the right path to get what you need, because you may need to talk to them and you may need a copy of an older elevation certificate. So
Good.
That's what I would recommend for Sarasota County.
Awesome. Hey, our last question, then we'll open it up for questions, deals with something that's brand new and yet very important. Accessory dwelling units, ADUs. Do you allow them? What's the process for getting them approved? How do you handle those that are existing and were not permitted? And are there any limitations on who can occupy an ADU? There's a lot there. So Brad, we'll start with you on that.
So this actually falls under the zoning ordinance or our UDC. Steve's got a copy here. When I was a zoning administrator, these didn't exist. I've been out of zoning probably for about 7 years, so this is something relatively new. This was always taboo. We didn't do that. The commissioners didn't want it. The community did. So
Yes.
when I first heard this being advertised, I thought, no way, we've gone 180 on this.
We did.
So, yeah, and we will again, that's the beauty of government. In another 10 years, we won't allow it, but we'll have a bunch of non-conforming. That's what we do. Everyone says, how does that become non-conforming? Because we changed the rule. Only the government can create non-conformity. So I'll read through this. Steve had asked our zoning department to come up with some of the answers to this. So if you have questions related to this, I'm going to suggest you email our zoning guys. They have a central area, and I'll give you that email address first in case they forget. It's really simple. It's zoning@scgov.net.
Say it again.
All right, so it's zoning at, S as in Sam, C as in cat, gov.net. And they have a zoner of the day. Usually you'll get an answer right away. So is that her answers there? Correct. Okay. So they call them ADUs, are permitted on property zone RE, which is residential estates, RSF, residential single family. So those are the only two districts that you're allowed to have the accessory dwelling units. What is the purpose of getting that approved? ADUs must meet the criteria as outlined in the Unified Code, which is here. And then apply for a building permit through the county permit center. So they do require permits. I'm going to assume the ones that I've seen come through are treated from a permitting standpoint, just like a new single family home. Same criteria, drawing, setback, drainage plans, because these are typically, if I'm understanding this correctly, detached structures. The allowance for the ADUs did not exist prior to the adoption of this code. And if there are existing structures that meet the criteria by adoption of the code, they may now be considered as an ADU. So that's actually important. So I gotta go back to what I said. If you've got non-conformities out there now, or lawful or not, this code may fix that. So I wish I had more time to look into this, especially because my zoning background, I find it interesting. But sometimes if you know too much, then people expect more. ADUs may be used as a full-time residence. So that's a change. We used to use in the old days the word guest house. Guest house was for intermittent use. It didn't say 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. It just said couldn't be year round. So this is something new. It can be used as a full-time residence. An ADU may be rented for periods of 30 days or more. So you can't use them, you can't rent them, excuse me, not weekly, or correct, for 30 days or less than 30 days. The homeowner must live in either the primary structure or the accessory dwelling unit if they're going to rent it out. The one thing I was looking for is
2 copies.
okay. This is online. This probably, I'm going to hazard a guess. You guys probably run into this question a lot. I would assume, because back when I was at zoning, we certainly got asked by realtors a lot about guest houses and the use, because it can be a source of income too.
Yeah.
So we got asked all the time. I really suggest you follow up with the zoning folks, because the one thing that I'm looking for, and this is the ordinance, I was looking for the more of the codified version. I'd like to know what the definition of one is, and I don't think she really.
I think I.
Do ya?
Yes, I do.
Larry may,
Yeah, and Larry might too.
Accessory dwelling.
yeah.
Because there's probably 2. There's probably under the building code, I'm assuming, maybe.
No,
No.
they're not.
So it's our zoning ordinance. Do you guys have one
There
similar?
is a
We just
specific
recently
definition.
passed a ADU.
Okay.
Right.
That was the thing I couldn't
Yeah.
open, but it does have a
That's Manatee
specific,
County.
this is Manatee County, but there is a definite definition, and it has certain things I'm sure you guys will recognize. Let me just.
I'm gonna jump to Larry,
Yeah, go
let
ahead.
him talk about the cities, and then we can come back on the
Yeah.
county, because we're running out of time, and I want to allow some.
Yeah, I'll just stick to the questions then. We do allow for accessory dwelling units. They are so limited in size to 650 square feet. The process for getting them approved would be to make an application for permit for an accessory dwelling unit on your lot. They can either be attached or detached. You could create one in your own garage space or a detached structure. There's a maximum of 1 per zoning lot that's permitted. They're prohibited in certain zoning districts. And the owner has to occupy one of them, whether it's the primary dwelling or is it the accessory dwelling unit. I don't really want to dwell down into the minutia of everything, because it's quite a long ordinance of that. But if anyone's interested, they can certainly email me, then I'll provide them a copy of the full ordinance.
Any insight on how we're dealing with the existing ones? The in-law suites have existed ever since I've been doing real estate, which is a long time, but they've never been allowed. They've just existed.
Yeah, well, there were some jurisdictions, some zoning lots within the city that allowed for an accessory dwelling unit. It was very, very limited. And they basically, called them mother-in-law suites or whatever. But there was no vetting of grandfathered units that I'm aware of. They were either lawfully permitted or they weren't. If they weren't lawfully permitted, they wouldn't have any vested rights in continuance. But that doesn't mean that you can take one and say, now and say, I want to apply for a permit to turn this into an accessory dwelling unit. This is what I have. These are the modifications that I'm going to make. I'm going to add the kitchen. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And hopefully it meets all the setback requirements and it's in the appropriate zoning district. So If it never, secured a permit, and it wasn't, lawfully existing by permit, then there would be no vesting.
No grandfathering in that case. They have to hold a permit. Well, that's the end of our questions. So I know we had a couple, gentlemen in the back, young lady in the back. So let's start over here in purple.
Yeah, I think Brad answered the one question. I was going to ask about purging, and I guess that new section up there explained it. Back to the ADUs, there was a question when that first came out as far as impact fees. Is there?
Impact fees.
I think it's more of a zoning question.
It is, and I apologize, probably just because of the time frame. Same thing with like our FEMA, we could probably go on for hours. This is so new to Sarasota County, probably the city, that my permitting group hasn't had much to do with them. Again, we treat them like single family homes. I don't know if there's impact fees or not, but that's an excellent question. If you email zoning,
Okay.
The things that I think that what you're speaking to, and I agree with the suggestion that you talk to zoning, because I think it is more of a zoning question than really permitting. But the questions that you're going to be looking at, yes, now we permit them, each county and each cities, or, in our area, presumably have some form of their own rules. But the things that you're going to be looking at when you're dealing with the zoning people are things like density, parking, and it depends, I think, you guys correct me if I'm misspeaking, but I think each municipality has. We love to be right. We'll make it up. We're like to say it that way. So I feel like each municipality has the authority from the state statute to go ahead and kind of more narrowly define, okay, now the state says we can have accessory dwelling units, but the city or the county has to decide, well, what kind of how big does the lot have to be? How many people, what's the density gonna look like? How do we deal with parking? Where are we gonna put it as far as setbacks go? That sort of thing. So it is probably a better zoning to go deep, if you want to go deep.
Okay, let me go back here to gentlemen.
I think it was question 4, there was a discussion that somebody turned in the homeowner for non-permitted work. They had to give a phone number and name, contact. Is that given to is the complaint's name and number given to that homeowner? Or is that confidential information?
That actually came out in a recent statutory change from the state. And once that complaint is made, it becomes public record. So if they requested it, we would have to provide it.
same with the county.
So it could in fact. In the back and then see.
Okay, got a question. If it's about agritourism or agriculture exemption, you have a property that you have somebody wanting to buy. It was a bona fide established working farm in the past. It has, say, a office, an outbuilding or two. The new owners don't want to use it as agriculture. It's going to be for personal use. How do you rectify the permitting process on those buildings that did not require a permit?
You can answer that.
So that's happened once. That I know of in my 24 years in the county. And the people actually was the realtor that brought it up. So it was like you said, bona fide working farm, and they had the ag exemption. We still require a permitting process for them. Today, we may not have then, we have consistently been inconsistent how we've treated farm buildings in Sarasota County. So the correct process is you get a permit, the building guys confirm during their normal review that this is exempt, and they don't apply it. Zoning, drainage, resource protection, local ordinances still apply. So the process is the same, just the building guys don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak. But to go back to it's now going to be used for personal use, there's really not much unless it was a commercial use that was allowed and they need to get a CO, we're going to make them get a permit at that point. But just to go from an previous ag use to a homeowner's use, the structure's there. If there's nothing that's going to bring it before us in Sarasota County. If they come in for permitting now to modify that structure, then at that point, we're gonna look at what they're doing and they're gonna have to permit it and get a drawings.
Well, they could be cited for code enforcement for use not allowed, under the original exemption. Well, I've seen that happen.
I haven't though. I mean, I'm not saying that it hasn't in Sarasota County, just I haven't had that scenario come up because I don't know what we would cite them for. If they're using it for their own personal use and it's no longer, I hope we wouldn't go after it.
Well,
Maybe they're homestead.
We'll talk.
we'll let you work and talk on that one afterwards.
Yeah.
Is it agricultural? Okay.
Okay, talk about the owner builder disclosure where, the lady husband died, didn't finish the renovation or addition, comes in, gets a permit as builder. And she tells you that she's gonna sell the property within a year, which is a violation. Say the owner knows that it's permitted, closed, the new owner, 6 months later, the house burns down because of something that is in the water. Can that new owner go back to the municipality for issuing it or go back to the state for violation of an owner builder permit?
Okay, you lost me.
So you're saying the owner pulled the permit, then sold the house within 6 months. She didn't stay in it for a year, so she violated the 1-year requirement, and there was a fire. So now the new owner wants to go after the county because they didn't enforce the 1-year time period?
Who enforces, where
Who-
does that
who
new owner
enforces the
go
1-year
to
time?
enforce the owner builder disclosure for selling of a property within?
Both, well, because that's basically set in statute. I mean, I think if the state wanted to prosecute that, they could. I've never in my career seen the state prosecute that for a violation of the disclosure statement. I mean, we have to get.
And that's
to the side.
29 years.
But I can tell you, I've never seen or heard of anyone getting prosecuted for failure to comply with the owner disclosure.
But don't tell your customers.
Yeah, right.
I think that,
But I think it was actually, developed to target people that were, building and flipping, building and flipping, building and flipping. So I think that if it got to be a problematic thing where a guy was doing it, 4 to 6 times a year in a jurisdiction, then it would probably raise to a different level. But I think there's also circumstances that get, life happens. Maybe she had intended to stay there forever and, something happened.
Yes.
I mean, the state couldn't make her stay there for another 6 months to clear it. So that's why I think there's not a whole lot of enforcement on that. I think it was implemented for a specific reason. And I don't think that, all of a sudden I decided to move. It's probably one of those that would implement. You'd have to show a track record.
and I feel like you could have proof of that. I actually had a proposed transaction. It did not go through, and I was happy about that for my buyer because the seller was very honestly with the buyer trying to finagle this. I'm just gonna do it. I'm doing all the work myself, and it was new construction. And so I think that I use that as an example because there were so many other things that I could point to as evidence that clearly he did not intend to live there, like the MLS as he was currently under construction. But I think that most of the 9 times out of 10, it's going to be too hard for them. I don't know if it would be construed as a code enforcement violation. I don't know if that's a mechanism that you bring these people in, but it would be so hard to really put the burden on for them to have the resources to say, okay, little old lady, we think, I don't see the permit doing that. But that doesn't mean that I would say talk to a litigator, like Fred Moore, because I think these things could speak to negligence and something of that nature against your seller, just as more of like an evidentiary thing, not necessarily a cause of action that you could pursue.
So we are at the end of our time, but Zena, we said we were going to give one last question. So
So my question has to do with vendors who are doing work that they know clearly is supposed to be permitted. I know what I'm supposed to do under my license. I'm sure that an electrician does, an air conditioning vendor, and several other people out there. And what we are finding as realtors, when we're looking at this and we talk to the seller, they said, well, I just hired so-and-so and I assumed he was pulling the permit. Or I thought, I didn't know if it had a permit or not. Are we doing anything to address some of these bad vendors who know for a fact that they were supposed to pull a permit for a new electrical panel, for a new AC, those types of things? Is there anything you guys are doing on a
Anybody want to take that?
Yeah,
Steve?
we actually do have a contractor licensing division that if we know contractors are doing work without pulling permits, we'll take them in front of our board and they can reprimand the contractor all the way up to not allowing permitting within Sarasota County. We can't do anything against the state license. They could go to a different municipality and possibly work. I think there is an intergovernment relations that goes.
Yeah, because I mean, you're really looking at maybe two different aspects there, either unpermitted work or unlicensed. Work.
I'm mostly talking about the ones who have the license and are not pulling permits.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a citation system that was brought about in, I think it's in 489, 113, I think it was somewhere in that 489 statute that allows jurisdictions, once they, if they find the person there that's walking or they answer on a complaint or go out on a complaint, find that the person there is licensed and didn't pull a permit and it didn't fall in with one of the exemptions of it, you have 24 hours to apply for it. Like a lot of the mechanical people have 24 hours to apply for that permit. Emergency plumbing repairs, they have 24 hours to apply for that permit. But, if they're outside those timeframes or whatever, and they didn't pull a permit, that's unpermitted work. That could carry up to a $2,500 citation. Okay. If they get cited with that, okay, for unpermitted work, okay, depending on how far you want to go with that, I mean, you typically, once you cite a guy for $2,500, he's probably not going to do it again, or if he does do it again, that would be a second mark on his license. Okay, so then we would probably forward that to the state's attorney's office. Okay, or to the Department of Business Professional Regulation is what I meant to say. Now, if it's an unlicensed individual that's out there that is doing this kind of work, again, we have the same citation process for him. We catch him on the first one, okay? He pays the citation fee. If we catch him again, it could be a third-degree felony. If we forward it to the state's attorney's office, and they decide to prosecute with the information and evidence that we bring forward. And I've just not had a whole lot of luck with the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. And I don't want to really speak to that in this forum, but there are processes, but again, the ponderance of the evidence has to be, we have to make sure that they're the ones that did the work. So in a lot of cases, we depend on, the homeowner to provide us documentation, show us where he wrote you a contract, show us where you made payments, that kind of evidence.
Yeah.
So we feel comfortable moving forward through a citation process.
I would tell you to be careful though, because that statute that he's referring to gives that authority to municipalities, and they're not consistent. So Pinellas County is uber strict. They prosecute, any little thing they come across, and with their construction licensing board. Sarasota County has one. I don't think that Manatee County has one. I don't think they, have they? Okay, because I never really hear about them prosecuting anything. Okay, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I was under the impression that Manatee County kind of had got this reputation of everything's okay.
Well, we have run over. I thank you for staying. Let's give a round of applause for all of our panelists. Thank you for being here in person and for being online with us. And this is, I believe, been recorded, so you'll be able to go back and look at it again. So enjoy your day. Thanks for being with us. Make it a great day.
If anybody does want a flyer for the.
Yeah. And any